Welcome back to another episode of the Battle Buddy Podcast. If you have a service-connected disability or you think you might have a service-connected disability, then today you need to pay attention to what my guest has to say. We all know that the VA system can be a little clunky to navigate, and that might be the understatement of the year. But today I've got a guest on who is a veteran service officer. We're going to just dive right into all kinds of things about going through the claims process and all kinds of things you need to know. So if you think that you need to file a claim or you're going through a claim or you're just interested in this information, you want to hang on and check out this podcast episode.
Welcome to the Battle Buddy Podcast with Keith McKeever.
Welcome to the show, Clayton. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, Dean.
Yeah. So go ahead and give us a little bit of a backstory of who you are.
Yeah, so my name's Clayton Simms. I started the CivDiv YouTube channel. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps for 10 years. Did infantry my first 5 years. Then my next 5 years, I moved into psychological operations. I've been out since 2019 and pretty much been working for the government in different capacities and doing my own thing.
Awesome. And so how did you get into, the VSO types, all that stuff? How did that all come about for you?
Yeah, so I started the YouTube first. I was like, hey, I had some friends that had some bad personal experiences with for-profit companies.
Surprise,
You know what? Yeah, I was like, you know what? I think I could do that, but for free. And one of the things I pride myself on is veteran benefits. We've already earned them, right? They're already earned. Now you just have to get them adjudicated. And so I had a sour taste in my mouth hearing that companies were taking advantage of, I guess, veteran ignorance to the process. And so I started the YouTube. Once I started YouTube, a veteran service organization called Del K. Graham, they ended up reaching out to me. I became a volunteer for an accredited VSO. And so I can help veterans process claims. I submit their claim to a claims writer who then submits that claim. And then I also create content for not just CivDiv, but I also create content for Del K. Graham's social media page as well. And it's all around informing and educating veterans for free.
Awesome. Well, kind of like what I said in the opening, like the VA is a system. It is clunky. It is a mess. It is, like you said, like we've earned it as veterans. So sometimes it's kind of like, to paint a picture, it's like connecting the dots.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
You've earned it. You just kind of have to connect the dots and navigate through the system, and it sucks. It's painful. It is what it is. Like there's no other way to put it. Like there's no way to spin it into a positive experience.
Not at all. So the VA is bound. There's a reason for that, right? Every veteran can't claim PTSD. Okay, it has to be based and grounded in evidence. And so the VA is guided by law and policy. And every decision they make is by the 38 CFR. And so you have to abide by policy and kind of say, hey, I have this disability. I have this ailment. It's connected to service because of X, Y, and Z. And you kind of have to draw the dots. You have to connect the dots for the VA for that to happen. And the issue is no one goes to medical while they're in service, right? You don't want to be that guy, okay? You don't want to be that guy that lets your squad down because if you don't show up to the field exercise, your responsibilities don't go away, right? They just get put on someone else. And so now there's that stigma of not going to medical. And that's where just that one factor is where you see a lack of medical evidence start to take over. And now you have trouble connecting the dots, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and both systems have a place, right? Like the mission has to continue when you're in the military. The system is there for a reason. The mission has to continue. The job has to be done.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like the VA. Like you have to have guidelines. We should all understand that as veterans. There should be some guide rails, right? Like think about the E4 Mafia, right? Like there should be some sort of guide rails. You don't just put a bunch of E4s in a room and not expect things to get fucked up.
Oh, yeah. The VA is not a barracks lawyer, right? It's an actual department of the government.
Exactly. So like, there should be some rules and some guidelines and some processes to go through. But, I don't know how many people work for the VA, but it is a huge organization and lots of money pumped into it. and there's steps and processes. And yeah, your file is going to end up on people's desks, and there's only so many people, and there's so many claims. I don't want to skip ahead, but like when you have new legislation like the PACT Act, and then you have so many people that qualify, I'm sure they just got to have massively just flooded with incoming claims. So like what could have been hypothetically 3 months to go through a process could be 6 months, 9 months, a year now. So like I said, I want to jump ahead into another topic, but like
you hit it right on the head. Right. So with the introduction of the PACT Act, I think the average claim right now is 104 days. At least that's what's on the VA site. But that was prior to January when the PACT Act went into effect. But now that it is January, as of this recording, since the PACT Act is in effect, now we have all these claims to be adjudicated. And claims don't go away. So now we just have more claims to adjudicate. So now that 104 days might turn into 500 days. Who knows, right?
I can only imagine what happened to people's desks. So I know it's probably digital, but just imagine like somebody's got like a stack like this on their desk, and all of a sudden somebody just knocks on it. Hey, here. Boom.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Like I can just imagine the feeling of looking at that. Like, well, I guess I got plenty of work to do.
Oh yeah.
I guess for the employees of the VA, it's job security, right?
It is.
We as veterans are keeping them gainfully employed for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I always try to stay away from like VA bashing. Okay, if you want to bash the VA, you can go in a Facebook group and bash the VA all you want, right? But most of the people that work for the VA are veterans anyways, and I guess I choose to believe that they're not out here messing with veterans claims, right? It's just a process. There's a knowledge to that process. And at some point, there's a lot of disconnects between the veteran and the VA. And, but yeah, I'm definitely not bashing the VA, but they have their work cut out for them, right?
I agree. I'm the same way. I try not to bash them. Sometimes it may seem like it's kind of negative, but
oh yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot of veterans, and their hands are tied too. Like they can only do so much. Like they may read somebody's, they may be a raider and they may read something and may be like, hey man, I really feel like, on paper, like I really feel for what I'm seeing in this claim, but I'm not, I have to play by the rules. Like they have a job to do. Like they may be like, man, this seems like this person's really gone through some shit. Like I really wish I could give them 50% for this, but from what I see, I can only give 30.
They're bound by law and policy, right? So they're very constricted. And so if you give the VA any reason for a lower rating or no rating, they legally have to accept that evidence, right? It would be illegal if they're like, you know what, we're going to ignore that piece of the evidence and then we're going to give you 50%. It just wouldn't be illegal.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to maybe highlight that some people don't understand is everything has these guidelines, and I love calling it VA math, but like, correct me if I'm wrong, almost everything goes on a scale of 0, 10, 30, 50. I don't know if anything goes in a 20% disability.
So each disability is very different, right? So mental health is 10, 30, 50, 70, 100.
Okay.
Where like your back could be 10, 20, 40, 60, 100. So there's no comparison there. It's just bound. It's whatever's dictated by the 38 CFR.
Okay. But that CFR states for each one of those percentages, there are certain specifications. Like I happen to know like joint issues like knees and ankles and hips and stuff like that. Like they take measurements and like you have to be within certain ranges of motion of whatever. I don't know. I'm definitely no doctor, but like it has to fit on whatever. Like, and if it's in or out of that determines like what percentage you get and all the scientific stuff. So like there's no there's no argument. Like
that's exactly how they do it. Yeah. So when it comes to knees, like act like my knuckle is my knee right now. What is the degree that you can flex it? Or I'm sorry, what is the degree that you can flex it? And what's the degree that you can extend it? And they will do some math and combine those angles together. And pain is a part of that, right? If you have pain, if you need a brace, that's a minimum 10%. But in addition to that, so you can only flex 30 degrees and you can extend 45 degrees. and there's some math that goes into that, and they'll say, boom, hey, you got 10%. I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah. And that's where the VA math comes in funny.
Yeah.
That's why I try. It's really funny trying to explain it to civilians. When it's like, oh yeah, like you could be like, oh yeah, well I have I don't know, I have a disability that's let's just say 10%, and I have another one that's 10%, and I have a 50%, and a 30%, and a 20%, and I'm still rated at 40%. Just hypothetically,
Yeah.
and they'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's VA math. Don't ask.
Oh, yeah.
It's government math.
Yeah. The best, exactly. Government math is a good example. The best way I try to explain VA math is at 90%. If you're at a hard 90%, so not 86, not 94, you're at 90, there's 10% left to 100. I think we can all understand that, right?
Yeah.
So,
that's simple math. That's not VA. Yeah.
There's 10% left. And so now you're dealing with 10%. So if you have another 50% disability that comes into play, it's 50% of that 10%.
So you're only getting a 95%.
Yeah. So now you're looking at 5% because half of 10.
But correct me if I'm wrong. Once you hit that 95%, then you round up to 100.
Exactly. Okay. And so if you're at a hard 90, you need 50 more percent to get to 100 because they're going to round up.
Gotcha. I did know that of the rounding rule, which, may confuse some people. Like if you look at certain calculators or some things online, like you can play with things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is something good to know. Like if you're doing the math and you're like, oh, I'm only going to be at like 88%. No, they're going to round you up to 90. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah. So, or if you don't get up to 94, sorry, you're screwed. You're still at 90.
Yeah, exactly.
You better go back and find something else. So
why that really matters though is let's say you're at 88%, okay, and you want to claim tinnitus, but you've been denied. Tinnitus is only 10%, and so you do the VA math yourself, you're only going to be at 89%, which at the end of the day, nothing changed because you're getting paid at 90%. And so now you have to ask yourself, am I really going to go out to a private doctor, get an independent medical opinion? Am I going to pay for this service to have the same result, right? And so that's really when it comes in, that cost benefit analysis, saying, hey, am I really going to fight for this? Like, is it going to change my overall rating, or do I just keep complaining about it to VA healthcare? I don't claim it yet because nothing changed, right?
Would you say that typically that conversation should come into people when they're at that 90% mark? Because I know that the biggest jump is that 90 to 100.
Oh yeah, no, you're exactly right. The more you have to really weigh out, is this worth it, right? So if you're at 90%, the only things you want to claim are things that are going to push you to 100. If it's not going to push you to 100, personally, I would recommend you don't claim it. You absolutely can if you want to, right? There's no harm in that. But personally, I wouldn't claim it. I would still go to VA healthcare and say, hey, my knees still bother me. Hey, I have ringing in my ears, right? Because just in case you have enough evidence one day that does pushes you to 100, now you have this trail of medical evidence.
Yeah, build a paper trail.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just thinking that as you were starting to say that, I was like, yeah, at least build the paper trail. Because, it is a big uphill battle. It's, once you get to, probably 70, 80, 90%, you've got probably a lot of things stacked on each other. You could have one disability that stacks up to that. Or you could probably have, I would guess most people probably have 7, 8, 9 various things. Yeah, I think most of us have a little bumps and bruises along the way. There are a couple of 10% here and there. Probably all of us have tinnitus. I know I do. That was lovely when I took that test. She goes, you have ringing in the ears? I'm like, what's this sound like?
Yeah.
She was trying to explain it. I'm like, well, hell yeah. Like I've had that for.
Oh yeah.
Because that's tinnitus. I'm like, that's what that is. Like, okay. I just thought it was weird. Yeah. Anyway, but, so anyway, back to the main questions I had. That was good stuff. But, how does somebody go about getting their benefits in the first place?
Okay, so let's do some time scenarios, right? So that let's hit everybody in no matter what age you're at or where you're at in your career, we can hit them all. So let's start with your active duty. If you're active duty in a very perfect world, I would say 1 year before you get out of the military, you go to medical, right? All those times you didn't go to medical in the past because you didn't want to let your squad down or let your unit down, that's out the window, right? Now you're focused on, hey, I'm leaving in a year. I need to focus on me. And so 1 year you're going to medical, but VA disability claims for active duty can't start until you're 180 days out. So that's really the first time frame, which is 6 months out.
Build the paper trail. I mean, what are they going to do? Kick you out?
Yeah, exactly.
A year
Or
out?
you get
I mean-
medically retired, and now you're like, all right, cool beans, right?
Okay, yeah, whatever.
But the very first time frame is that 180 days when you're active duty. Step one is find a VSO, a veteran service organization. Since you're active duty, depending on where you're at, if you're in the States, there's definitely going to be a VSO on post, on base, right? And so you could just set up an appointment, have that appointment. If not, any type of VFW, DAV, Disabled American Veterans,
yeah.
is a huge organization. Any accredited VSO, that's step one.
I think the American Legion sometimes has them.
Yep.
And
yeah, absolutely.
At least here in Illinois, I think most of the counties have a VSO. I know mine is at my local county. There's like 7 or 8 people in the office there.
Absolutely. So there's county VSOs and then there's accredited VSOs. I will say this though. When you hear VSO, it's just Veteran Service Organization, and there are thousands of VSOs across the nation, okay? There's only about, I want to say 40, give or take a few, accredited VSOs with the VA. So for instance, a nonprofit VSO that does hikes to prevent veteran suicide, right? That's a VSO, but that has nothing to do with being an accredited VSO by the VA, right? Accredited VSOs file VA disability claims. That's who you want to find.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's step one. 180 days out, find a VSO. You're going to file a claim. It's called a BDD claim, benefits delivery at discharge. Honestly, it doesn't matter what it's called. If you just find a VSO, they'll take care of the rest, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know when I did mine initially when I got out, but I did one a year and a half ago, and I went and sat down with them because it had been like 10 years.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like, all right, well, tell me what's happened in the last 10 years, kind of thing. It was like, walk me back. What's happened in the last 10 years medically, all these kind of things. So, like, that's the kind of things that my county VSO did.
Oh, yeah. That's a solid sign that he's a good VSO, right? So that's the first time frame, 180 days out. The next time frame is within 1 year after you leave the military. That 1 year is crucial because that's when your back pay starts. So if you file a claim within that first year, you're going to get back pay to the date that you got out, right? We all want back pay. When that back pay check hits your bank account, you're going to be like, yes, this is awesome.
Steak dinner on for the whole family. Yep.
But in addition to that 1 year time frame, there's these things called presumptive conditions. And presumptive just means, hey, the VA assumes this came from service. Tinnitus is one of them. If you're diagnosed with tinnitus within 1 year of getting out, it's automatic. You have service connection, which is good. Okay, that's what you want. And so that it's, I guess to give you a good example, if you have back pain within that first year and you claim it, it's very hard for the VA to say, hey, that didn't come from service. This came from the last 2 months you've been out. Like, really, I was in the Marine Corps for 10 years. You can't tell me the last 2 months I got back pain, okay?
Unless they find record you were in a bad car accident like a month before or something like that.
But that first year is crucial versus the opposite. Let's say 5 years go by and you're like, hey, my back hurts. Now the VA is like, well, you've been out for 5 years.
What the hell have you been doing in the last 5 years? You've been jumping out of airplanes as a hobby,
Yeah, exactly.
Extreme sports.
Legally, they're bound to investigate. Hey, does this back pain correlate to that 5 years you've been out? And you just want to take that option away from them, right? So within that first year is probably, I would say, the second best time to file a claim, right? Now, let's talk about everything from 1 year on, okay? And so now we're talking about you've been out for a year and a half to you've been out for 20 years and you served in Vietnam. All this is in the same bubble, okay? And now when you do submit a claim, you're fighting the time gap. And in a very perfect world, when you do submit a claim after you've been out of service for a long time, you want medical evidence. But again, it goes back to what we said earlier, right? How many people don't go to medical while they're in. And so now not only are you finding a time gap, but more than likely you have a lack of evidence. And that's really when you see independent medical opinions and nexus letters be considered to be awarded your claim, because that's just you lack medical evidence. And so that's pretty much the three phases of VA disability claims.
Right, because it takes three things for the connection, for a service connection.
Yes, it does.
What are those three things for people?
So you need an in-service event. That's number one. In-service event could be like a deployment. It could be very generic like that. It could also be, an extreme scenario. You saw combat, you saw someone die. But outside of combat, it could also be a car accident. Hey, I was active duty. I was in a car accident. It could be an off-duty car accident, or it could be like a car accident in a training exercise. Either would be okay. But for this disability to develop, something had to happen, right? They don't just come out of nowhere. And so you need that stressor, you need that in-service event. The second thing you need is a service connection. And you can break service connection down into two things: either medical evidence in service, that's picture perfect, that's gold, right? Or you lack medical evidence in service, so now you need a nexus letter saying, hey, my PTSD came from service, although there's no medical records of that, right? And so you have in-service event, service connection, and then the third thing is a current and chronic diagnosis, meaning let's say you did have medical evidence of your back pain hurting from service, which is gold, right? That's what we want. That's good. But 20 years go by, you never submitted a claim. You never went to talk to your doctor about it. You never complained about it. And 20 years later, you try to submit that claim, the VA is going to say, hey, you have no current diagnosis, right? Obviously, it didn't hurt you that bad for the last 20 years. So now this claim's denied. And so you need those.
They're going to ask a lot of pointed questions in those appointments.
Oh, yeah. And the thing about those three things is if you're missing one of those, your claim, without a doubt, will be denied, right? So theoretically speaking, because we are informed and educated veterans, when we submit a claim, if you can identify those three things and make it clear to the VA, you're going to win your claim every single time. It's when these three are missing that claims get denied.
That's a good point. So that's really what everybody should be looking at with their VSO. Breaking down, hey, what do I want to claim? And then breaking each one of those down. And okay, like I know with my VSO, he went and got my medical records, and it was like, okay, all right, I see, this, that, and there. And I'm, so making that connection and this, that, and the other. I mean, luckily for some people, like if you deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan or something else like that, like you're pretty well set. You can just pretty much be like, hey, I was deployed once or twice or 5 times or 10 times or whatever, like just do that, which is kind of funny when they start asking questions, when it start hurting.
Yeah.
Because then like, because I'll take it, to my case, like, they start asking like knee pain, like, I don't know, like sometime on that deployment, could you tell a month? No.
Yeah, and it's like, totally okay to be generic too.
It was like 14 months ago, like 14 years ago. Like I don't know. Like I was here from this date to this date. Like sometime in there, like I was young and dumb and jumped out of the back of 5 tons every day with all this body armor on.
Oh yeah.
Like, yeah, no, I wasn't the brightest at 21 years old. I don't think any of us were. But yeah, I mean, they're going to ask a lot of pointed questions like that. And the longer you're out, the harder it is to be like, you're going to feel stupid in those interview questions when they start asking those. So.
Oh yeah. So when you say they, you're talking about CMP examiners, right?
Yeah, the CMP examiners. Yeah, when they're asking these pointed questions and they're like I don't know. Like I don't know exactly what month.
Yeah. So CMP examiners, they have 2 jobs to do. They need to identify how severe your symptoms are, right? Saying, hey, you can only bend your knee this far. That's the severity of the symptom, or like a pain level. That's their first job. Their second job is to establish service connection. So you're right. They are going to ask you, when did you get this knee pain? And I'm telling you, if you say anything but from the military, denied, right?
Oh, yeah. They're going to write it all down.
Hey, yeah, I heard it on this deployment, but really 2 years ago, I broke it in my civilian life. They're going to be like, that sucks, dude. Denied, right? It's like you really got to navigate those C&P exam questions and just be specific. Don't give the VA any reason to deny your claim. Hey, it happened on this deployment, right? I jumped out of a 7-ton. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. How was it worded to me? Like my VSO was like, look, these people are going to try and be friendly, and they're going to try to get you to open up, and they're going to try like he's like, don't lie, obviously, but like if they can try to get you to say something and they can take it out of context, they will.
Oh yeah.
Like if you like you said, like a car accident or something like that, or like, oh, your knee hurts. You got into a car accident, your shoulder hurt from that. Maybe your knee hurt from that too.
Yeah.
Like, so, it's like loose lips sink ships kind of thing. Like, just answer the question, point blank. So when did this start hurting? It was on, I remember it was my first deployment. It was this year. We were deployed between this month and this month, sometime during that. I couldn't tell you exactly when. And that's it. Shut up. Don't try to elaborate and come up, be like, gosh, I remember this exact thing, like this one day that I did this or that, like just make it as simple point and whatnot as possible. So, but we should back that up, like you said, because the C&P exams. So once you fill out the paperwork and you submit it to the VA, you're going to wait weeks and weeks. And then a company is going to call you, one of probably a handful of companies they use, and they're going to schedule you for exams. And then you're going to have to probably drive like I did, like 3 hours to go take an exam someplace that's a 25-minute exam, and then drive 3 hours back. And you're going to have to do that probably 2 or 3 times, depending on how many claims you have to do. And you're going to go see these independent doctors in these little shopping malls. Maybe it's a hospital clinic. These little hole-in-the-wall places all over the place. Yeah. Like you're looking for the address and there's nothing posted on the wall, on the building. And you're like, where the hell am I? But, so that's the process. Like you put in the paperwork, these companies call you, they're farming it out, however they're paying these people to do it. But they are doctors and medical professionals with specialty experience, and they're the ones actually doing this and interviewing you and asking these questions. So that's kind of probably an important step to highlight.
It is.
Then they give all that back to the VA, and a person at the VA makes that rating decision, correct?
Exactly. You explained it perfectly.
Okay.
There are 3. So it's a contracting company. It's a government contract. So what it is. There's 3 companies that do C&P exams for the VA. One's QTC. I don't know what all these stands for. One's QTC, one's VES, and the last one is LHI. So if you have a C&P exam, it's going to come from one of those 3. It can also come from the VA itself, but more than likely the VA is booked up, which is why the government contract exists in the first place, right? To kind of supplement that. And
I've gone through 2 of those.
how I explain C&P exams is, one, the C&P exam is not the VA. It's a private contract with the government, right? And so bashing a C&P examiner is not bashing the VA. I'll tell you this let's just talk about government contracts real quick, okay? The government does not pay top dollar for anything. Okay?
What?
Yeah.
You're kidding.
And so I think you know what I'm implying here, right? You're not getting the bee's knees best world psychiatrist.
You're not getting the valedictorian of the medical school class, huh? Oh,
exactly. Okay. And really, so I say that to kind of build up what I'm about to say, is that C&P examiner probably sees 10, 12 people a day. And let's say you have your whole case and your whole medical files, your medical records. Let's say you did 10, 15 years in the military. You're telling me that examiner spent 20 minutes looking at all your evidence, asking you all these questions, and then putting a detailed medical opinion within that 20, 30-minute time frame. And I mean, it is what it is, right? And so that's another reason that will push veterans to get an independent medical opinion, to where C&P examiner sees 10, 12 veterans a day, and the independent medical opinion will spend all day, 8 hours a day, writing one letter, right? And so those are just some nuances that people don't really understand, right?
I never really thought about that. Like I just went to those appointments and I'm like, okay, hey, they're qualified medical professionals. They're doing their thing. They submit their report to the raters at the VA. Okay. But I never really thought about the fact that they're getting paid to do it, whatever they're getting paid, but they probably are at the very least seeing a handful a week
Yeah.
in addition to whatever other caseload and patients that they have on their normal business. So they're probably maybe spending at most an hour,
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
15, 20, maybe 30 minutes of prep work. Well, maybe 2 hours total, 15, 20 minutes of prep work, reading through your stuff, whatever the VA sends them. I had some of them that I would drive literally 3 hours and I'm in there for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they would ask like 10 questions and okay, I think that's all I got. Like
that also
good.
assumes they are doing the prep work, right?
That does, exactly. And
how many
then
times do you
they're
walk
taking the time.
into an appointment and you're like, they ask you questions, you're like, dude, I know you didn't read my evidence because that's in there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I never really thought about it. You just kind of go through the motions and you don't really think about. You just assume that they're qualified people doing the best that they can, but
on the
they may not.
other side of the coin, because I don't want to bash them too hard, right? They are, you're right. They're anywhere from nurse practitioners to medical doctors, right? And so that's if you need your claim adjudicated, or if you do submit a VA disability claim, you're gonna see a CMP examiner. And I don't want to, fear monger saying all CMP examiners suck, right? If you have the evidence, the VA can't ignore evidence, and so the CMP examiner makes their opinion. But at the end of the day, a VA rater is going to make that decision. So don't be spooked by CMP examiners. But if you are denied, right, you really want to know why you were denied and see if your evidence can kind of combat that decision.
That's a good point. And we also need to realize that they are people too. And there's a reason that they're taking all these jobs. They may be veterans themselves, and it may not be about the money. It may just be their way of being able to do these exams. And obviously they have to play within the rules as well, but it may be their opportunity to just play a part in helping veterans get benefits they deserve. I had one or two that I went to that I knew they were veterans. You could see the signs in the office, and it was like, okay, like at least they understand me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're probably not going to completely dismiss anything that I say. They're going to listen to me, at least, anything that I have to say. So people should keep that in mind too. They are They are doing a job. They may be doing it for the right reasons. They may, there could be people out there doing it for the wrong reasons and just trying to collect a paycheck from the government. But if they're doing it to try and collect a paycheck from the VA, they probably ought to reevaluate their income producing activities.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right though, right? There are good VSOs, and to be honest with you, there's bad VSOs, right? You might go find a VSO to help you submit your claim and find out that he's dog shit. You're like, what do I do? Step one, find a new VSO, right? Same thing with CMP examiners. There are good CMP examiners. There are some that are better than others. We'll just say that, okay? And yeah, you're right. They may be doing it for the right reasons. They may be in debt for $200,000 to pay for their med school, right? And so they got to make money. Like they're people too, right? So
and I'm sure if you go to like a local VSO, who they may also know who some of those CMP examiners are, and may know like, hey, this person, if they send you to this person A versus person B, like person A is going to be more favorable for to go to versus person B. Like your outcome is better. So I mean, I'm sure there's something to that too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
The VSO might know that they might have their work cut out for them on an appeal if it goes to CMP examiner B versus A.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, there's some things there. So I mean, that's why it's important to have a good VSO. And maybe, talk to them, interview them, make sure that everybody clicks, that they communicate well, and that they, know what they're talking about, and that you're comfortable, and go through the process. So
I'll tell you right now how you find a good VSO or a bad VSO, right? And you can find out in the first 3 minutes of meeting a VSO. If you walk in that office and they're like, "Hey, what do you want to claim?" and you just say, "I'm completely ignorant on the process. I don't know." and then they spend like 5 minutes saying, all right, we're going to submit this, we're going to submit that, we're going to submit that. That's a bad VSO, right?
Oh yeah, just like picking and choosing for you, like blanket.
Yeah, or
Oh, that'd
not
be bad.
explaining that versus your case that you described earlier, saying I went to a VSO, he asked me, hey, the last 10 years, tell me about your medical history. That right there, within the first 10 seconds of conversation, I know that your VSO was good, right? So that's you have to gauge that, right? There's definitely no VSO meter out there, but yeah, you have to gauge that. And if you don't feel at the end of the day, if you don't feel comfortable with the VSO, find another VSO. Like it's not the end of the world.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, there's plenty of them out there, and there's some that will do a darn good job for you. So now, when it comes to the actual claims, that an interesting one for you. What are the most common claims that people are getting out there?
All right. So off the top of my head, I'm gonna say tinnitus. So off the top of my head,
I knew you were going to say that one.
the VA publishes a report every single year. I just read 2022, maybe a couple weeks ago, and tinnitus was on there. It was back pain. I think it was lumbar strain specifically, which is like lower back pain. Mental health, so anything from PTSD, depression, anxiety, major depressive disorder, all of those things.
Is traumatic brain injury included in that, or is that rated something differently?
Yeah, so TBI is included sometimes. And just to give a quick breakdown on this, is the VA rates symptoms. They don't actually rate diagnosis, right? And so that's why PTSD, depression, and anxiety are all the same. Because if you have PTSD, you're probably going to have symptoms of high anxiety, right? You might be depressed. You might have suicidal thoughts. And all of those three symptoms are the same. When it comes to TBI, which is a weird one, TBI can also share the same symptoms. And if that's the case, then TBI will just be roped under your PTSD, right? Or depression or anxiety. But
Gotcha.
TBI can also have other symptoms like brain damage, like actual brain damage, memory loss, but in a very extreme form of memory loss, migraines,
Like physical neurological issues, stuff like that too.
Any
Yeah,
sort of like,
makes sense.
I'm not a doctor, but any sort of like fluid that's weird up in there, okay, that's definitely related to TBI. That's not related to PTSD. So in that instance, like for instance, if you were in an IED blast and you have TBI from that, you're probably going to have PTSD too. And so in that case, you can have separate PTSD ratings and TBI ratings. But gotcha. I would say those are the top three most commonly claimed: tinnitus, and you can throw hearing loss in there too. Those are two different disabilities, tinnitus and hearing loss, but conditions of the ear, lower back pain, and then mental health disabilities for sure.
What would you say are some of the easiest for most people to claim?
That is a loaded question. So when it comes to easiest, I'll approach it like this, and then I'll give you Clay Simms' answer, right? The easiest claim to submit a claim for is one that you have medical evidence for. Period. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as you have medical evidence from service, you have a current diagnosis, you have service connection, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, submit the claim, right? But now that's the real answer. I'll give you Clay Simms' answer. If I was to pick three of the easiest claims, I would say tinnitus, right? Because how do you diagnose for tinnitus, right? I have ringing in my ears. Okay, check mark, diagnosis. I would also say migraines. You can't take an X-ray or an MRI of your migraine, okay? And so if you do have migraines, there is a way to get evidence for migraines, like a buddy letter or a lay statement would be a great example. And then frequent visits to your doctor, medication for migraines, stuff like that is evidence. But you can't take an X-ray. You can't take an X-ray of tinnitus either.
Yeah, history would be important on that one. Yeah, history of medication and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so tinnitus, memory loss, and then my third one, if I really had to dig for a third easiest claim, I would say probably skin conditions like acne, right?
Acne, really?
Acne. Oh yeah. If you have acne, now most acne service-connected conditions that I've seen just across hundreds of veterans that I come across, it's normally rated at 0%, right? And the reason why is because you can take medicine. You can take Accutane, you can take creams, it heals them up, boom, your symptoms are gone.
I
Okay?
mean, plus, I mean, every rating is dependent on how it affects you,
Yeah,
right? So, like,
exactly.
I mean, acne, like, how does it really affect you? It might be kind of annoying on your skin,
Oh
and it
yeah.
might help hurt your self-esteem, I guess. But
Yeah,
like,
no.
it's
Ab-
not like it's incredibly painful, I guess. Then again, I very
yeah.
fortunate. I guess I've never really had a lot of acne, so
You brought up a great point that I'm going to get to right after this. But there are disabilities that have medication a part of it, right? Like sinusitis. If you take medication for sinusitis, obviously you've been diagnosed, you have it. But just taking medication, I believe, is 10%, right? Whereas acne, if you take medication in 38 CFR, that is not a severity of symptom, which is why it's commonly rated at 0%, right? Unless you have like a very extreme case of acne, and it talks about the portions of the body, how much does it cover, and that's really whenever you get rating for acne. But you said something. You said acne might hurt your self-esteem, but that's about it, right? Which is a huge implied question there. It's like, okay, if acne is rated at 0%, why would I go through the trouble of claiming acne, right? And I'll tell you why. If you are
secondary.
depressed, yeah, if you are depressed or your acne causes you to not take your shirt off at the beach, you can't, let's say you have kids and they go to swim lessons, you can't, enjoy the swim lesson with your kid, whatever the case may be, okay? That you could link, it's definitely possible to link depression secondary to acne. So now the 0% acne claim maybe got you a 50% depression claim, right? So that's when you would consider 0% service
Yeah,
connected
I mean,
claim.
so the same thing would work for somebody who has, um, somebody who's an amputee, burn marks, scars,
Yeah.
anything along those lines, where you know
Oh yeah.
showing that off in public or something like that could cause mental
Absolutely. And
trauma, anguish, whatever.
it doesn't have to be like a visual, like an amputee or acne. That's something you can see. It could be lower back pain. Hey, my back, I can't play baseball with my son because my back hurts too much. No one can see that. But if you have the medical evidence to support that, if you've create that medical trail, you talk to your healthcare doctor, you go for counseling for depression on your back, you always reference your back, you're creating this correlation between your back and depression. What you're missing is causation, and that's when it comes to a nexus statement, right, from a CMP examiner or from a private doctor. But yeah,
Gotcha.
that's a solid point.
Awesome. Now I asked you what the most common were and what the easiest, so I want to flip the script a little bit
Yeah,
because obviously some claims are easier, but some of them have got to be extremely difficult to get
I
through.
already know my number one.
Yeah. So what would be the top, two or three that if somebody is going to try and claim them, they need to be aware that they are in for a battle and it is
Yeah,
going to be tough to get it claimed?
two of them off the top of my head. I know one, sleep apnea, and sleep apnea is like a coin flip. Okay, and first let's talk about direct to service. If you're in service, if you're in the military right now watching this, go get a sleep study done. Whatever you have planned for next week, drop it, go get a sleep study. If you're out of service and you don't have that sleep study, you don't have medical evidence in service, 9 times out of 10, you submit a sleep apnea claim, you'll be given a sleep study, you'll be going all through all the tests, and you'll get diagnosed. Hey, brother, you need a CPAP, right? You have some serious sleep apnea, but it's not service connected. Okay,
But
and
if it is
that's
service connected, CPAP is what, 50%? Am I
50%.
correct? Okay.
Yes, there are proposed changes that aren't in effect yet, so don't even worry about that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just happen to know that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. Okay. So without the study in service,
Exactly.
the
It's
VA,
gonna be
it's
denied.
easy for the VA to just be like, yeah, well, we have no connection there. Like
Absolutely.
there's just nothing there. Okay.
Absolutely. Which forces veterans to get an independent medical opinion and a private nexus letter from a doctor, right? And even then, because sleep apnea Sleep apnea can be linked to PTSD, but there is no solid proof saying if you have PTSD, 100% you have sleep apnea, right? There's no medical study. There's not enough evidence behind PTSD to actually, it correlates with sleep apnea. It doesn't cause sleep apnea, right? Those are two different things. And so really when you're looking at sleep apnea secondaries, you want to grab multiple conditions that contribute, that all correlate. Because if everything's pointing this way, it's at least got to be somewhere over
So
here. Right?
PTSD can be connected to it. What else? What else can be connected to
I would
sleep
say
apnea?
hypertension, high blood pressure, tinnitus,
Okay.
there's also certain deployments like campaigns that are historically linked to sleep apnea, like going to Iraq and OIF or OEF in Afghan or OIR. And so if you have PTSD, you have OEF or OIF or OIR or all three of them, and you have hypertension, you have tinnitus. Now, what the doctors can do is grab multiple things that correlate. None of them cause it. None of those cause sleep apnea, right? But if everything's pointing that way, it's very hard for the VA to be like, nah, it's over here. You're like, okay, dude.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
That's number one. That's probably the hardest secondary claim. And the second one that I think of off the top of my head, I'm going to say hypertension. It's very difficult to prove hypertension, and something I see that's very common in veterans is they'll be like, "Hey, I got a high blood pressure reading. I want to submit a claim for hypertension." And having a high blood pressure reading and having hypertension are two separate things, right?
I mean, you could just be all like worked up or something by being in the doctor's office. And
I had some Starbucks, the elevator wasn't working. I had to walk 3 flights of stairs, and now I got a high blood pressure reading.
You just had 3 shots of espresso in that Starbucks dark roast, and
yeah, exactly. And so if you look at the 38 CFR for hypertension, you'll see that the 38 CFR demands 3 different blood pressures within the same day over multiple periods of time. Right? You have to show, hey, I consistently have high blood pressure, and that's hypertension. Another factor of hypertension is it can be medicated, right? And so now you're in the position of, well, if I have my CMP exam, do I not take my high blood pressure medicine, right? And high blood pressure is serious, right? We're talking like this can kill you, okay? And so by no means do you skip out on your medication to get a high blood pressure reading. And that's kind of where you'll see hypertension ratings at 0%. And really, when it comes to your health, you do not want that, right? Take the medicine, don't deal with it. You don't want that. If you have it, by all means, submit the claim, right? But that's a bad one to have.
I thought you were going to go the direction like with hypertension. When I think about things like hypertension and cholesterol and things like that, sometimes I just think about like what we do in our society. Like, we're Americans, let's just face it, right? We have a McDonald's and a Taco Bell on every corner.
Oh yeah.
We don't eat the cleanest or the healthiest, okay? We don't eat like some other cultures around the world in other countries, are eating lean meat and healthy food and lots of vegetables in our diet. It's all garbage and chemicals and fast food. Like, so, I mean, I could imagine there could be part of that too, especially if you've been out for like 20 years and like, oh, well, I want hypertension. And it's like, well, you've been out for 20 years and you've got no connection, and you're 150 pounds overweight.
Yeah. It's same for sleep apnea too, right? That time gap goes, you gain, you're considered obese. And now the VA is like, well, is that from service or is it because you're fat, right? Like there's no definitive answer. Same with hypertension. I will say this about hypertension though, is it definitely, hypertension is under the PACT Act for our Vietnam era veterans and the Korea veterans as well. So if you have direct contact with Agent Orange, there's some other chemicals listed in PACT Act. But if you have dealt with that and you have a diagnosis, it's instant service connection for that. So
I'm glad you mentioned PACT Act because that was the last thing I wanted to get to was some of the
Yeah.
latest legislation. I was telling somebody the other day, they said something about, the VA and processes. And this is where we can actually, well, not just to the VA, we can give some props to our elected officials over the last couple of years for getting some shit right. And like the Blue Water Navy Act,
Oh yeah.
finally getting those guys some recognition. Between that and the PACT Act, I think what we got about both those happened in the last year and a half, something like that. So what should people know about, first of all, the Blue Water Navy Act, if they happen to be Vietnam veterans and would fall in that category?
Yeah, so the best thing to do when it comes to legislation for VA disability claims is just Google Blue Water Act disabilities. All right, and if you have a diagnosis, boom, you have service connection. That's it. All you need is a diagnosis. There's gonna be some parameters like in the PACT Act, and the if you meet, I think it's deployed to Afghan or Iraq after 2001, you meet presumptive conditions, right? So all you need is a diagnosis. You have the time frame. That's it. I think a lot of people, because when it comes to legislation, it is complicated. It's confusing. But to make it as easy as possible, get a diagnosis, look at your DD 214, put those together, boom, you win the claim. It's that simple.
Yeah, I don't know. Like on the PACT Act, if you are in Iraq or Afghanistan, you have one of those, you're pretty much golden. What about like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar?
Kuwait? Yeah, so there is a list of countries. The PACT Act's broken down into 3 categories, right? If you go to va.gov, you'll see the Gulf War era, which is everything from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, like in Kuwait, early days Iraq, to OIR in Syria, right? And so Kuwait's on there, Iraq, Afghan, Syria. There's like 5 other countries, right? All those are on there. And another category is the Vietnam era, right? And you can click on that link. It'll talk to you about hypertension, talk to you about Agent Orange and other chemicals that were used. And Korea is kind of roped in that Vietnam era as well. And the third category of PACT Act is the Camp Lejeune water. So if you were in Camp Lejeune during the specific timeframes and you have a diagnosis that's on the PACT Act presumptive list, that's it. Submit the claim, you win.
Yeah, so anybody who's listening or watching, if that's you, you definitely need to go check that out because I looked at it just again the other day, and I want to say, what is there for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans? There's like 13 cancers or something like that, and almost another like 12 or 13 other diseases that are, I think, mostly respiratory.
Oh yeah,
like the burn pits,
like
COPD, asthma, like, oh God, probably gonna totally mispronounce the names, but like cytinitis or whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of breeding stuff. I was because I'm not a medical professional. I was like Googling them, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. That sounds terrible. Like weakening of the lining of the lungs, and then like stuff growing in your lungs, and I'm like, that sounds terrible. That sounds worse. That sounds terrible.
If I had to guess which. We'll find out next year, but if I had to guess which PACT Act claims will be claimed most, I would say asthma probably will be number 1 for the Gulf War era. I would say hypertension would probably be number 1 for Vietnam, right? And so to add on what you said, like if you went to Afghan, Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, wherever, and you have asthma, 10 years later, you have asthma, you get that diagnosed, submit the claim. That's it. You win. Asthma. Boom. Check mark. Done. And so that's what the PACT Act does. It makes service connection easier. That's all it does. And it's very huge for Vietnam vets, right, that have been battling with Agent Orange and hypertension for 50 plus years now. And it's going to be very huge for asthma, rhinitis, sinusitis, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think what's really big, especially with all the burn pits that we're operating too, is the cancers.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew some people that I served with that, ended up with brain cancer, and there's been high profile cases that have been, brought to the forefront in the news of people who've come down with different cancers because, they felt like they were linked to the burn pits. So like, it's a very real thing. Obviously, if it made it into the PACT Act, So
Oh,
to
yeah.
have that protection for those kind of things in there, that like it's in law.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's in there. Like it's massive. Those Vietnam veterans, hell, the Blue Water Navy guys waited almost 55 years to
Mhm.
get protections for Agent Orange. I mean, for our generation to just a few years to get some
Yeah.
protections. I mean, that's a huge step in the right direction. That's why I say it's weird to say this, but we should give a round of applause to our elected officials for doing something right.
On top, yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I totally agree with that. On top of that, there's more VA employees. There's more VA raiders. I'm not saying the VA is this golden unicorn, okay, but it's better than it was, right? The sentiment is the Iraq Afghan vets of today or the Vietnam vets of yesterday, right? And so when we're old and crusty, we're basically going to be the new Vietnam era vets. But instead of battling for disability, now we have the PACT Act. And so, for instance, I'm 30 years old right now. I have no asthma. I have no respiratory issues that I know of, at least. But 20 years down the road, I get asthma. Guess what? It's service connected, right? That's what the PACT Act does. And it's not a question. It's like, oh, you got asthma? Boom, service connection.
Yeah, that's definitely where it's great. I mean, because it's there already.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike those Vietnam veterans who could not get any protections. And unfortunately, the guys and gals who had issues and died from them
Yeah.
and never got the care, the recognition, the reimbursement that from disability that they should have gotten, just because there never was anything for them.
Oh yeah, that also reminds me that there's two sides of the PACT Act. We talked about the disability side. There's a whole healthcare side of the PACT Act that offers healthcare to exactly that situation, right? If you're a veteran and you meet PACT Act presumptives, you now have healthcare for free. You don't have to pay for it. And so it opens up, PACT Act has opened up healthcare to millions of veterans, mainly our Vietnam veterans, right, that had a sour taste, because how the sentiment of the military is today, it's a billion times better than how it was to the Vietnam era veterans, right? When Vietnam veterans came home, they got spit on, right? They definitely weren't. If you were to compare Iraq Afghan veterans to Vietnam veterans, we got treated like kings, okay, compared to that Vietnam era. And so Vietnam veterans may not have filed for any disability claims because they tried once.
I know some that never still have 55 years later.
They
Yeah.
tried once, they got denied, and was like, well, fuck it, dude. This country, blah, blah, blah. I serve, blah, blah, blah. They don't care about us, blah, blah, blah. Right? It's the same story, different person. And so, luckily and very fortunately, that's not something that, OEF, OIF, and OIR veterans and Desert Storm veterans don't have to deal with, at least not to the scale of the Vietnam era.
Yeah, well, we've proven that we can take care. We can do something to take care of the vets we have now, and put something, set up something for those people who may unfortunately develop something over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Because let's just face it, we'll always need a military. The next generation that kids will come up will end up serving. God forbid that they have to go serve in combat, but they'll have to serve. They'll get their bumps and bruises too, whether or not they go into combat or not. But, I mean, you could have not saw combat and still have problems for Camp Lejeune water, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
So, no matter where you're at, what you're exposed to, those things can follow you for the rest of your life. So, hopefully we have learned that there are ways that you can do some things and set up things to take care of that generation, before they get into their 70s and retirement age. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very easy to go to the combat side of the house when you're talking about disability, right? But make no mistake, just because you didn't see combat does not mean you're not eligible, right?
Yeah.
In a very extreme case of military sexual trauma is a pretty serious event that's going to lead to some very serious debilitating disabilities, right? And same thing with a car accident. You got in a car accident when you're 19 years old, active duty, you broke your ankle. Guess what? When you're 40, bro, that ankle is going to hurt a lot, okay? And so claim it. You're 22, you're 23 years old, you broke your ankle, claim it. You might get 0%, right? But when you're 40 and 50, that 0% might turn into something else, right?
Yeah, I didn't even break my ankle. I twisted my ankle like 4 times when I was in. Went to the doctor like twice, and it was just in my records, my initial claim. I got 0%, still at 0%.
Yeah.
Once or twice a year, I'll twist it, and it'll be a little sore, wrap it up. It'll be better in a couple of days. But, hey, it's claimed.
Absolutely.
In case it ever gets worse, you never know. God forbid it does, but, you never know when you slip and twist on some ice or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But you had a good point, you don't have to go to combat to experience some things. The PACT Act too. There's some legislation in there too. I can't remember what years it was. Cold War era. There was, and I'm sure there's a very small group of guys that this qualifies for, but nuclear cleanup efforts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like when I read that, I was like, I never even heard of these disasters. And these guys were going in, they're cleaning up this radiation and all these things that happened and exposed to all this stuff. And it's like, man, I'm a history buff and I didn't even know about that.
Yeah.
And for them to get, care, 50, 60, 70 years later, better late than never, I guess. So,
yeah, I guess. I mean, it really does. It really sucks for the Vietnam era vets, right? And the Cold War era. I mean, it really does suck that the PACT Act got implemented in 2022 and then, started submitting claims or adjudicating claims in 2023. That part sucks, but at least it's here, right? So,
yeah, like I said, better late than never. I mean, It's something. So, well, Clayton, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing with us. There's a plethora of nuggets of information for people to check out. If anybody wants to check out your YouTube channel, I've got it scrolling across the bottom. I'll have it in the show notes as well. So have no fear, people. As you know, I always put it in the show notes. So if you're watching, listening, it's down there. I highly encourage everybody to go check it out. Any other way people can reach out to you or check out your content? I know you got a TikTok too.
Yeah, you can hit me up on TikTok. I have a Gmail. Time is pressed. Everything I do is free, right? So if you send me an email at thecivdiv@gmail.com, I will help you one-on-one with your claim. And I answer those first come, first serve, right? So shoot me an email. I can at least give you advice. I'll help you find a VSO to submitting a claim by yourself. Wherever you fall within that spectrum, I can help.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Like you said, if you need help finding a VSO or got some questions, make sure you reach out. Definitely go check out his content. Got a lot of good stuff on there about even some of the questions he breaks down even more that we talked about today. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
There you go, folks. I hope you enjoyed. Remember, you can go to my website and check out all kinds of information and resources at battlebuddypodcast.net. And as I always say, if you have something on there or have something you think should be on there that's not, please reach out and let me know. And if you're struggling today, remember this National Suicide Hotline number is now 988-PRESS-1.